With that, I am going to turn it over to Simon Stevenson.
Okay, thanks. Liz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, good. Hopefully everybody else can too. So thanks everybody for participating in this webinar. If you were in the last one, then this introduction will be very familiar to you, but we're still looking for input, so we're very happy to have you here. So this first slide really just sort of indicates the 14 federal agencies that make the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, which we call IOPIC. So I'll keep on calling it IOPIC from now on. Next slide. So while IOPIC was created back in 1984, it's really since 2011 that it sat within the National Science and Technology Council, or NSTC, and that is an umbrella science coordination effort across all the ranges of science and, where applicable, all the agencies and departments that have a role in that science. So it's a really good place for IOPIC to sit inside. NSTC is guided by the Office of Science and Technology Policy within the White House, and that arrow is pointing at the OSTP offices within the Eisenhower Executive Office building in Washington, D.C. So next slide. So there's quite a lot on this slide. It shows the relationship between the interagency federal body, IOPIC, up at the top there, and the activity we call IOTA Collaborations. So when the federal group, folks meet, they are quite often careful to make sure that there's only feds in the room because they might be sharing plans before they're really finalized. We call that pre-decisional discussion. And in order to be fair for people who might be competing for the funds later on, you know, that has to be basically a federal-only discussion. But the work of IOPIC are actions of both feds and non-feds. All the many people that engage in Arctic research. And on the left-hand side there, you see a list of where those folks might sit in terms of organizationally. And we don't even have to have folks in the collaboration side from the U.S., as shown in the bulleted list there, the international organizations. So IOTA Collaborations is certainly a big tent, and we think of it as basically fundamentally where the talent for Arctic research lies. Next slide. So this slide is a pictorial of the current plan, the plan that we're currently operating under. So each slice of the pie represents 8 of the 9 goals in the current plan, and you see sort of scientific themes there, with the 9th being an integrating goal, and in the middle, environmental intelligence. And then there are 4 rings depicting the 4 policy drivers, and those are worth probably mentioning. Arctic's role in the global system, security, stewardship, and human well-being. And those policy drivers sort of are derived from the nation's Arctic policy from 2009, and also other efforts outside of the scientific realm, if you will, like the nation's strategic plan for the Arctic. And IOPIC created collaboration teams for each of the goals. Next slide. So this slide and the next slide are really, you know, transitioning to now looking forward, the next plan, the next 5-year plan. The plan is a federally produced document, and it reflects the intent of the 14 U.S. federal agencies. for their work in the Arctic. But I doubt that this next plan or the first two have not been considered comprehensive, meaning that they probably won't capture all the research supported, particularly research that's supported by a single agency. The plan really will focus on areas where the agencies need to work together to have a bigger impact of the investment, and also to make sure that that investment is efficient and effective. So there's less repetition and more coordination. The law that established IOPIC also requires us to work with those other stakeholders that we discussed a couple of slides back. Another overarching purpose is to advance understanding of the Arctic, to inform real-world solutions to problems, and also U.S. policy in the Arctic. Next slide. And so this is sort of a summary of what I've gone through so far. This slide, the main points really are that the plan is a federal document produced by the feds, but lots of good input from the youth community. It strives to improve federal coordination as we conduct our research, as we fund it. And previous plans have really focused more on basic research, but we're hearing already that this next plan should have a better balance between basic and applied or use-based research. So I'm now going to hand over to Nakush, who's going to take us through the exciting part, how you can influence or what is in that next plan. Nakush?
Thanks, Simon. And if we could go to the next slide. Great. So I'm going to focus on sort of where we are now within sort of the overall process of developing the next 5-year plan for research. That's 2022 to 2026. And so this first is sort of an overview of the timeline that we're working under. I joined the IOPIC team in April as a plan development director, and prior to that, starting in the fall of 2019, they were sort of getting things together, securing resources, thinking about how to organize, and working on sort of the timeline to delivering a plan by the end of 2021. So we're actually right now in the development phase, or the public input phase. So that's the second box from the left on this timeline. And oh, there we go. Cool, thanks. We got a little highlight there of the second box. So we're in this public input phase now. The next phase is a drafting phase, focused on federal agency composed drafting teams actually putting words on paper. And as we look out towards activities in 2021, we're looking at another public input phase to happen during that period, getting input on an actual draft. So I'm going to come back to a couple of these different points here as we move through the rest of the slides. But I wanted to give you an overview of where we were going. Next slide. Thanks. So the phase that we're in now in this development phase, this public input phase, we've had a Federal Register request for information that's been open since the beginning of April, and we'll be closing on August 2nd. So coming up here in a couple weeks. We have during this period focused on listening sessions, engaging with different communities. Simon, I think, mentioned needing to bring in some more of the social science side of things. So we're sort of working on a little bit of directed and targeted outreach. And that includes to Indigenous and Northern community organizations. We've started a newsletter that I'll come back to. And then we're doing a little bit of our own homework and looking and synthesizing some of the information that's already out there. So whether or not there's planning documents or strategic documents that exist from communities, from the different federal agencies, from the state of Alaska, and some of the recommender bodies that work on a statewide level, looking at that information and synthesizing it. And that information will be used with the input that we've received through this public input phase into a workshop that's planned for September. Next slide, please. So here's the information for the public registrar. Again, the deadline is August 2nd. We're specifically looking for a couple of we've targeted a couple of specific things to focus on. One is the context of the plan. So what are the critical issues that are out there? How can federally funded science and research help bring some knowledge and information to the decisions that need to be made in those areas? The second thing we ask people to focus on is the organization of the plan itself. What does the structure look like? Is it something that could be reshaped, or does it need to communicate science needs in a different way? So we ask to focus on those two areas in the request for information. Next slide. We've set up a couple of different mechanisms to provide input, recognizing that the Federal Register shouldn't be the only option there for people. So we have this email address, iarpicplan@nsf.gov. We also put a survey, an online form on the website. So that's another option, and asks a couple questions there. We have a Facebook page, that's another opportunity, and then we have public webinars such as this one that are a way that we can both get information out, but also an opportunity for you to provide information to us. The collaboration teams have also been reserving a space within their monthly meetings to address the plan development in some way, and in particular, the Coastal Resilience Collaboration team is reserving every meeting. Each of their monthly meetings has space to discuss the plan, so that is another opportunity and forum to provide input. And here's our website. It's on the public-facing side. You don't need to have a login or be registered as part of IARPIC Collaborations in order to access it. So you can find all this information on our website.
And I've just added the link to the chat. So if you want the live link, you can click it on the chat.
Perfect, thanks. Thanks, Liz. And so I want to emphasize that it doesn't matter how the information comes in, which mechanism through which it comes in. We're tracking everything, and it will all be treated in the same way. So there's a couple of things that we've already heard and that are kind of emerging here over the last couple of months, and I just want to highlight some of these emerging themes. So some of the things that we've heard is that we need to consider activities that respond to the priorities of Indigenous communities or Northern communities. We need to think about that some more. We need to think about activities and actions that support decision-making that needs to happen in the Arctic. And also to consider a strategy for how to build, develop, and sustain engagement of Indigenous and Northern communities. So those are a couple things that have emerged that I wanted to highlight. In terms of possible structures of how the next plan might look, there are a couple of different options. One is an update on the sort of current format. That's the format that Simon was mentioning. There are 9 research goals that are scientifically focused as part of the current format. Another idea is to develop a framework around a few sort of priority areas that are focused more in a cross-cutting way. And then another option is to build a plan starting from the policy drivers. So there's 4 policy drivers in the current plan. Build from that and develop a couple goals that align with those policy drivers. And really, there seems to be some focus on, particularly on the last 2, less on update of the current plan. So we may be looking at something that looks very different than what we have now, but some combination around focusing on cross-cutting areas and relating those to the policy drivers that we have in the current plan. Next slide. So the input, and how are we going to be using the input that comes in? We are going to be synthesizing that input, and along, with the sort of overview and dive into the existing documents that are out there, and we'll use that information to inform the September workshop. And then the other way that this information we use will be available to the drafting teams as they start their work later on in the year to actually put those words down and create drafts of the first draft of the next plan. So I think that might be all the slides. Oh, there's one more. So I wanted to share, here's my, my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. And I also wanted to highlight that we have developed a newsletter email update that goes out monthly. So our target is around the 2nd week of the month. The July one has already gone out. That's the 3rd one. I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter. It's a good way to get a heads up about events such as this one, any other opportunities to provide input, and just to track where we are kind of in the process. And if you go to our website, you'll see a button for the sign up for the newsletter. So if you're not already signed up, I encourage you to do that. It's a good resource. So I think I will close there, and I hope we intentionally left some time for questions, and so I'll turn it back to Liz.
Thank you, Nikush, and thank you, Simon. So we do now have some time for questions for Nikush and Simon. I would like to first open it up to anyone on the phone, since I know you can't raise your hand. But after that, if you have a question and you'd like to ask using your voice, you can use the raise hand function on the Zoom toolbar. You can also just put it in the group chat, and I will read it from there. So first, just to start off, we do have a couple folks on the phone. Would anyone there like to ask a question? And you can unmute yourself using *6. Okay, I do see a question in the chat, or a comment in the chat, from George Rowe asking, saying it would be great to see some examples of how the existing 5-year plan has been effective in guiding research and enabling synergy.
I'd be happy to take that one. I think there's a lot of examples, and others from the steering group could probably jump in. But one example was when we were creating the current plan, the effort called Mosaic, which is the drifting icebreaker across the Arctic that's currently doing just that. It's got a couple more months to go. Was identified as a high priority for interagency activity. There was going to be some agency activity, but it was pointed out this should be an interagency effort for the U.S. participation in that German-led activity. And that's what happened. The Department of Energy actually started to convene a group of feds so that we could just understand what each agency was doing. And that was a nice example. And second example, perhaps, is to come a bit closer to home. And there have been several efforts by actually multiple agencies looking at the changing tundra as it responds to warming. DOE have had a big effort, NASA have a big effort. This is an area that obviously Department of Interior plays in, and NSF. And so through these monthly meetings, they spur conversations between federal program officers who are funding these activities, and they are able to make sure that their investments are have this sort of outlook of what the other agencies are doing. That's a couple.
Thank you, Simon. We have a question from Gay Sheffield asking whether tribes are considered under Indigenous organizations or Arctic residents, and will there be engagement with the regional transportation hubs in Western and Northern Alaska as well?
Thanks, Gay. And actually, I will add, this is Nikush for those of you on the phone. I wanted to add an example to the previous question related to food security, which is a cross-cutting theme that's in the current plan, and that's something that falls within the Coastal Resilience Collaboration team. So they've been working to increase awareness around food security in the Arctic, working with ICC, Inuit Circumpolar Council, specifically on helping the research community understand more what food security means from an Inuit perspective and how to apply that food security lens through their work. So that's another example that I wanted to offer. And to Gay's question, we specifically reached out to tribes via letter and email. So that's like, all tribes, which is a pretty hundreds number for Alaska. We also have some targeted efforts recognizing that the current situation that we're in with COVID-19 and the pandemic has placed a lot of stress on communities, Indigenous communities in particular, and so I'm working with a small number of the regional Indigenous organizations. We have a regular meeting so you can talk about some of these things, but really relying on their networks and what, how they're gathering information and input to feed into this process. I'm also specifically working with UIC Science, and I'm not sure if Corey is on the line, but with Corey and with Bering Sea Elders Group, Melissa Heflin, on their efforts to get information sort of and input broadly from both the Northwest Arctic Borough and the North Slope Borough Arctic region, and also within the Bering Sea region. And I see a question, Rosemary. Rosemary is asking, when a community in the Arctic is facing health and wellness issues in reaction to energy policy, how can this plan change decision making? Thanks, Rosemary. Yeah, health and wellness is certainly a critical issue. We have a collaboration team that focuses on health and wellness, and I think it comes up in other places also, including within the Coastal Resilience Collaboration team. It's helpful to hear, what the community priorities are, and so that we can have that context as and that input as the federal drafting teams are working on drafting the next plan. And Simon or others on the Plan Development Steering Committee want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll certainly jump in. Because Rosemary's question is getting at informing energy policy. And I think that's an area, that's sort of the applied type of applied area that in the past our planning hasn't done a great job in. We've been really strong on the basic research, but less on the applied side. And so energy policy is potentially, a very good area that we should be thinking about for this next plan. Energy policy or energy solutions, and you could broaden that out to perhaps more infrastructure related work. So I think that's a very valid input that we should be considering.
We have another question from Adalhaid asking how the last plan was implemented and how this plan will be implemented with all the input, and also whether the September meeting is in person or virtual.
I'll take the workshop question, and then maybe Simon can speak to implementation of the current plan. The workshop is virtual, so we have transitioned all of our events that were planned over the last couple months, and also in the months going forward to a virtual format.
And so how was it implemented? Primarily the input, the implementation, was through these collaboration teams. We consider the teams just the way they were constructed initially in the first plan and continued into the second plan has been a significant success. It's building a strong link between feds and the actual actors in doing research. So the notion of teams will continue into the next plan. I'm very confident of that. That's a very important implementation tool. I don't have it in front of me. Maybe Sarah could look it up. The other thing to look at is our reports. We are required to produce reports. There was a nice one produced the last time. Martin Jeffries, I think, had a big role in editing. Martin's at the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Lab, to show how we were, the actions of IOPIC flowed into basically policy goals, and also, of course, tied to the goals of the plan.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think you're referring to, sorry, Liz, I think it's the last biennial review. If you're looking at the reports page, it's the last biennial annual report.
Yes, so I just included the link in the chat so you can see it on the right-hand side of that page under biennial reports to Congress. We have a question from Aaron saying, I feel like IARPIC is missing great insights from Indigenous communities, industry, academia, and the state and others by taking a feds-only approach to deliberations that set priorities. There are other federally funded partnerships who have figured out how to incorporate non-feds in more equitable ways without causing fund-award issues. Have you all looked into those other models?
So I don't want to leave you with the impression that that the Fed-only piece is totally separated from the partnership under collaborations. The point really is that there are times when the Feds have to do what the Feds need to do, and in order for there to not be a perception that others have written this plan and the Feds are implementing a plan that a select group have chosen to write. That's the way we do it, But I think you just have to look at the participation and the discussions within these collaboration teams, where you will see that there's a huge influence in the actual actions that go well beyond the Feds. The NSF, for example, doesn't have anybody in the field. It's all academia and their partners, which can be, as you point out, industry and academia and the state and indigenous communities. So, you know, and as we move more towards co-production, that will become ever more important. So I don't want to leave the impression that we have this sort of immutable boundary between the two. It isn't. We've set up collaborations to have the discussions with the people who are really doing the research.
Thanks, Simon. And I think it's from my view and sort of experience within the federal government, the collaboration teams are a unique opportunity where feds and non-feds can come together on some very specific issues and around priorities. And we recognize it's more difficult for some groups to engage in the collaboration space than to others. And so, you know, we're thinking about that and thinking about how to evolve that space. But as a space for feds and non-feds to come together, I think it's a unique setup that can be leveraged.
We have a follow-up comment from Gay saying, it sounds like tribes are not considered under either Indigenous organizations or Arctic residents in this effort. The Bering Strait region is not an organized borough and does not have an overarching governmental system. Coastal communities in the Bering Strait region should and need to be engaged at the tribal level for such an important topic as this research plan. Thanks,
Gay. Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, and sort of looking at where we are right now in the current situation, going in this instance, going through to some extent in a targeted way with regional organizing, or regional Indigenous entities, helped. We didn't want to create a significant burden on top of everything else that is already burdening each and every tribe right now, given the current situation. So it's always a place in which we can do better in the future. Thanks for that comment.
Again, folks, if you have questions, you can either use the raise hand function on your Zoom toolbar, or you can put them in the chat. I also want to pause again if anyone on the phone has a question. And I see, Bernie, you have your hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a member of Commonwealth North, and which is a non-policy, non-federal group that deals on policy. And we have a Arctic forum that started back up for the last 2 weeks and will go to the end of August, which is every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, and you can join it through commonwealthnorth.org. But just to let you know, we are putting together a policy on the Arctic also, and you're talking about federal and non-federal. We're obviously non-federal, so and we've got quite a few people involved in this. Not quite as many as you do, but all over, not just Alaska. And the other thing that we are involved with is food security for Alaska, which includes the Arctic, and we have a forum on that at 8 o'clock on Thursdays. So just to let you know that we do have, there are other items, other policy groups out there besides the federal that are bringing a different respect to some of the points that y'all have been bringing up. So that's just the point I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. The Commonwealth North efforts came on my radar just recently in the past week, so I haven't had a chance to tune into any of them.
We have a question from George asking what kind of preparation would be useful for the September workshop?
So what we're preparing for the September workshop is the syntheses that I mentioned, looking back over the existing documents that are out there and bringing that information together in a sort of concise way for the workshop participants. Also organizing the input that is received through this process and other processes that we've talked about and mechanisms that we've talked about for input, synthesizing that information for workshop participants. And the goal of the workshop, the goals are for participants to discuss what the priority research areas might be in the Arctic, consider the policy drivers, the four that we currently have, the context of where we are now, and also to consider any overarching principles and really to think about the vision and sort of framework of what the next plan might look like and make some recommendations around that. And we're looking at coming away from that workshop and conversation with something to propose to the Arctic principals for their consideration in October or November. Not remembering the exact timeline there, but yeah.
Great. We have a question from Adrian saying multiple research goals correspond to the thematic area of climate change. By considering the interconnections of the climate-related goals and the defined policy drivers, it could be of relevance how the global investment community can contribute in financing activities. The research community could provide more knowledge and lower the perceived barriers for global investors, private capital, to finance initiatives in the Arctic. How could this aspect play a role in the upcoming 5-year plan?
I'd be happy to take a shot at that, and I think the answer is this would be a pretty big challenge. And I say that because it's a relatively small piece of the federally funded portfolio at this time. We look at this linkage between, say, climate and economic development. That doesn't mean that a comment like this can't push IOPIC to more carefully consider economics writ large, and also just the social science. This is another area for social science. Again, there aren't actually too many agencies that fund traditional social science topics. There's some that you may not think of. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management does, for example, fund social science. NSF does, Smithsonian does. In the economic area, not necessarily as research, Department of Commerce does, as you might imagine. But this is a good thing. And so I would say, if you make this comment, putting it into this process of getting input, the challenge for IOPIC may be that it's not going to make it into this plan, but it pushes us to think about an important aspect that isn't currently there. The Arctic Research Commission also thinks about these things, and some issues related to development are in their goals report. So this would sort of echo that side. And I'll ask again, anybody on the phone from the steering group want to add to that question? Please do.
All right, that is, we're currently out of questions in the chat, but I invite folks to add other questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand using your Zoom controls. And if you're on the phone and you'd like to chime in, this is a great time to do that. And then it looks like we have a question from Aaron saying, how does NSF's Navigating the New Arctic Program of Research intersect with plan development?
That's for you, Simon.
Yeah, all right. So So navigating the new Arctic is, a focused area by NSF. At this time, I would say that it's mostly, NSF, and it hasn't. We haven't really tried to expand it into the interagency domain, but it does definitely play at the intersection of the natural systems, the social systems, and the built environment. We're very excited at NSF to have great collaboration with divisions and directorates at NSF that we have not played a particularly strong role in the past on Arctic research. Engineering is one example. Cyber infrastructure or computer sciences is another area. So we're very excited about the proposals that we're receiving. Obviously, not everyone gets funded, but we certainly do appear to be creating support for a community that was there, that wanted to do these complex areas. And in terms of the new plan, I think it makes NSF more, it increases our ability to support more applied research. It still has to fit sort of NSF models, but I think looking forward, it does allow NSF to play a more active role and support the primarily academic community, but not only the academic community in that space. I hope that answers your question, Aaron.
Thank you, Simon. Again, any additional questions in the chat, or would you like to raise your hand? All right. Well, I'll let folks continue thinking of questions. Oh, we've got one. We've got much of the process has been to document the Arctic, yet analysis of progress change has been lagging to show land use changes that affect dependent populations for community survival and health after changes, I think is what that last bit has been. I don't know, Simon or Nikush, if you want to speak to that, or if we're just going to, that's a helpful comment for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary. Just sort of thinking through, I need to think more about that one. Thanks for raising it. I don't know if Simon, you wanted to say anything on land use changes.
I don't have any crisp answer to Rosemary's comment. So just as I was talking about navigating the new Arctic, at that intersection of natural, social, and built environment, there are other questions that aren't at that intersection, but are equally important. The changes in the Arctic system, and in this case, it's land use, presumably human land use. And sort of how humans are actually sort of chasing the changes in the system as well. And that work also has a place at both NSF and other agencies. So that's sort of a good challenge for us, going forwards.
Andrew asks.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those applied questions, one of those sort of in that applied space, which is an area that we need to do, has been highlighted as an area for us to spend a little bit more time thinking about and trying to figure out how we engage in that space.
Yeah, if there's somebody from Interior, I know this is a strength of Interior. They're thinking about this a lot. But the issue for IOPIC is, can we get help for the folks in Interior who think about this from a broader community to include academia?
Andrew asks, to what extent is Arctic sea level rise being considered as an overarching problem to be jointly addressed by the modeling and observational community over the next 5 years?
I think that's a really good one. Issue that it's not hugely there in our current plan. It is there in our current plan, but not as an overarching issue. And so, again, this is input that we're happy to receive. We're going to capture all of these notes, by the way. And so these are basically, public comments into our process.
And we have a question from Jack saying the roles of healthy, energy efficient, affordable, and culturally appropriate housing are often not a focus of support for research funding. And can we expect more focus on this critical need in the years ahead?
Thanks, Jack. That is another helpful comment from, that I think, and I think it also falls into this other category of applied research, that we still have a lot of work to do to sort of figure out how, where are the places where the agencies can together sort of address these types of applied topics.
And a question from Gay saying, in the Bering Strait region, the ecosystems are shared, yet US to Russian Federation communications are sparse at best, especially during a time of very significant ecological and industrial change. Will this research plan be able to address these needs?
I see the changes in the Bering, the Bering Sea region, which would include the Bering Strait, as potentially a very significant driver for IOPIC in the next plan. I hope that we're able to somehow capture this in the plan writing activity, because it is a huge potential issue for not just the fishing industry, but all the people who live around the coastal regions. So how the plan would actually try to improve communications with the Russian Federation is a sort of different issue, but the changing Bering Sea is an important activity, and it would be great if the research drove us to a place where we could have better communications. I'm just not sure how well that's going to work in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably are aware of the international agreement around communications, specifically on research with the 8 nations, including Russia, that are members of the Arctic Council. So that's another avenue. I think U.S. Arctic Research Commission might be at least the U.S. Point of contact for that particular agreement, in addition to State Department.
And yeah, and I would say that the organization to organization efforts are probably something that the governments can support, but maybe not initiate. So village to village cooperation, sometimes agency to agency, both sides of the Bering Sea and Bering Strait, have been continuing to work quite well, despite the difficulties between, at the government to government efforts.
A question from Jim saying the plan helps increase awareness and synergy in research across the Arctic. How has or will the plan increase or broaden support for research from the different federal agencies?
So Simon, I'll add to this from your point of view at a federal agency. I would say from a sort of IARPIC perspective, having a place to be able to discuss some of these priorities and to talk with other agencies and also with non-feds about what is happening, what kinds of things are coming down the pike, is incredibly helpful and not an easy thing sort of to do across federal agencies. So having that space, having an IARPC as a coordinating body is incredibly helpful.
And I'd just add that having a plan, as long as, sorry about that, as long as, it's a well-written plan, a thoughtful plan, and it covers a variety of needs, it is, useful to have that document, both on the web and in the hands of our different branches of government, so that they can point to and understand what it is, what the big issues are, and how the federal investment in understanding those issues, is an effective way to get the knowledge that we need to move things forward. So hopefully, just having a thoughtfully produced plan with good input will help support the research that we're doing. It's not intended to be a plan that is asking for new resources. That's not its intention. It's really a plan that increases the effectiveness of the federal investment.
All right, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. I will start with Megan, since we haven't heard from her. Will the plan include language to address systemic and institutional racism?
Hi, Megan. Thanks for that comment. I know we're all sort of thinking about current events with Black Lives Matter, and also systemic racism, and thinking about equity and how to be inclusive and supportive of all the diverse voices that should be feeding both into the plan development process and into the sort of plan itself and how that is implemented. So we are thinking about it and trying to figure out how to sort of navigate that and use that as guidance for how we go forward. And I think I can try to, I'm reading the rest of the questions, Liz, so I'm gonna sort of jump back to a couple other things. So Adelaide, thank you for pointing out the SEDS planning efforts and looking at economic development plans. I can't off the top of my head address whether they are in there. There were hundreds and hundreds of documents. I will point you to the website, because we did post the list of documents, I think, that we've been considering in those overviews and syntheses of what is already out there. So you should be able to get that list on the website. And feel free to email me specifically, and Serena. Serena is on the call. Serena Stalin, she is the one who's been doing the work to look at that information. Gay, thank you for your comments about communications. This is partly what has led to that emerging theme around sustained engagement with Indigenous communities, recognizing that we need to work, put greater effort sort of across the board at doing that, and that includes communicating not only in sort of a one-way fashion, but having, building a relationship and really having more open mechanisms through which we can communicate with communities and also with other partners. So, well, now there's lots of other things that have come in. I thought I would get to all the questions.
So thank you, Nikki.
Simon,
real quick before you speak. I'm just going to let people know that there is another poll in progress. So while Simon is answering, maybe you can take a look at that as well. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's just to Megan's question. So I don't know whether the plan will, but I will say this. IOPIC has, an incredibly important tool for IOPIC is the collaboration teams. We also have a tool called the self-forming teams, and there are 3 teams that are already discussing these issues. It's actually probably more. There's a diversity and inclusion working group, there's an early career forum, and also an Arctic STEM education working group. And this issue, this key issue on systemic and institutional racism, I'm sure is much, a very important topic in those 3 groups. You might ask why 3 groups? Well, they've come about in different ways, but it is part of the conversation. So for folks interested, I encourage you strongly to participate in those 1 or more of those groups.
And thank you. I know just one second. I just want to say thank you, Rosemary, for your comment. I see in the chat box about Indigenous values and ensuring that those values are somehow part of the research process and planning processes. And I paraphrase. I'm sorry. I paraphrase that, but I know we're probably out of time. But thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate your questions and your engagement on this.
Thank you again, Nikush and Simon, for taking the time for this webinar, and thank you all for joining us today. I did just a minute or 2 ago paste the link to our webpage again on the plan development process, and there you can find all of the links for how you can submit comments, whether it's through the Federal Register notice, by email, online forum, Facebook page, or public webinars like this one. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your comments.